Hi there and welcome to episode 117 where I talk with Ayurvedic doctor Victor Briere about the Vata dosha. We do Vata 101, the importance of the Vata dosha, the strengths, the weaknesses, Vata and the mind, Vata and sleep, and also diet and lifestyle practices to help keep Vata in balance. So please stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda, Empowering Wisdom of Life. I'm your host, Colette, and in this podcast, I hope to empower you to take charge of your own health by sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. We will also discuss topics like health and wellness, nutrition, yoga, fitness, meditation, breath work, and much more, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to each other. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe to the show, and the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend you listen to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. I've also set up a Facebook group for us to connect and to support each other, and I'd love for you to join me over at Elements of Ayurveda podcast group. And now here's the show. Hello and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda. I'm very happy to welcome back returning guest, Dr. Victor Briere, to complete our trilogy on the doshas. And our final episode is going to be called Vibrating Vata. So you guessed it, it's all about the Vata dosha. And Victor is co-founder of Pacific Coast Ayurveda and a member of the Center for Applied Consciousness in Northern California. Welcome, Victor, to the show.
Thanks, Colette, for having me back yet again.
Yeah, it's great. I love our conversations. So I'd love to jump right in. And as we started with the other doshas, going to cover a little bit of Vata 101, please.
For those new Vata 101. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So Vata is, as all doshas are in Ayurveda, they're a combination of two elemental forces that contain certain qualities. So the two elemental forces that comprise Vata are ether and air. And the qualities that epitomize those elements, ether being spaciousness and clarity, and air being movement and instability. So those are the main qualities you're working with when you're working with Vata. And of course, it's always a two-sided coin. They have their wonderful aspects that are necessary for supporting all of life. And then they have their imbalance aspects, which can undermine health and so on and so forth. Mm. So the deal with Vata, the special thing about Vata and why Vata is considered the king and or queen of all the doshas is it's the only dosha that can move in and of itself. So that makes it very special and important. Vata, having the quality of movement due to the air element, moves Pitta and Kapha around the body. Mm-hmm. Without Vata, Pitta and Kapha couldn't do anything. They just sit there in their locations. So of course, if we want to be animate, living objects, beings, then we need movement. And that's all because of Vata, solely because of Vata. So the other aspect of Vata, the spaciousness, is something that's overlooked a lot in medicine and how important it is. Because basically Vata creates the nature of our channels in our body. And there are millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of tiny channels. And of course, the big ones that we know more readily, like the GI tract and stuff like that. But the way Vata is flowing through your body determines how much space and the nature of the space that's going to exist in all these channels. And that's going to have a huge impact on the function of your body as a whole. So spaciousness and movement are the two core qualities of Vata.
Very good. Yes, great description there. Thank you. So let's talk about the strengths of Vata. What are the strengths of the Vata dosha?
The Vata dosha brings everything to life. It animates us. It allows everything to circulate through our system. It sends information through our nervous system. It is in constant communication, or responsible for all our communication, I should say, within the body and without the body. On a more psychological level, it's responsible for our creativity and our inspiration. It's ultimately the dosha that is going to take us deep into meditation. It is one of the aspects of Vata is prana. So we all know prana from yoga. That's the life force, or it carries the life force on it. And it, in general, makes everything vibrate, like you said. Also, it's responsible for the senses of touch and hearing, sound. Plays a massive role in our physiology and our body, obviously. And then lastly, what people don't like to talk about too much, but it's responsible for ultimately for our death. It is the dosha that determines life and death. So I call that a strength of Vata, actually.
Yeah.
Very powerful. And it can go anywhere and do anything in the body. So it's the boss.
It is the boss. And like you said, it's responsible for the movement of the other doshas. Without it, a lot of these functions in the body wouldn't happen, and so on. And like you said, it brings everything to life. And the opposite of that then, if things aren't going well, which I'd like to go on to now, is the signs of aggravation with Vata. What happens when Vata isn't vibrating well or is over-vibrating? What happens? What are the signs, the typical signs of imbalance or aggravation for the Vata dosha?
Irregularity. That's the number one sign. So when you have symptoms or irks or agitations that don't sit still, so one day it's your left eye, and then the next day it's your right shoulder, and then you have a headache, and then you get a cough, and then everything's moving around and you can't pin anything down, that's surely Vata. If you're hungry one day, you're not hungry the next day, then you're super hungry right after you weren't hungry at all, that's all Vata. Any big, irregular, fluctuating patterns that you can't pin down, that's always a sure sign that the Vata dosha is aggravated and needs to be pacified. Otherwise, it's going to progress into some even more erratic pattern. And our body in general doesn't do well with erraticism. It likes stability and routine and rhythm.
Right. Being in tune with the circadian rhythms. It likes that rhythm. And you mentioned earlier that Vata is responsible for the spaciousness in the channels of the body. And so that would give us a hint that when Vata is aggravated, then there will be more constriction, right, in the vessels.
It could go either way. So it can be either hyperconstriction,
right,
or hyperexpansion.
Right.
And like a good example of a condition in which Vata has too much, the space element of Vata is too aggravated or too intense, is osteoporosis. So the bones are porous, and the size of those pores determines how integrous the structure of the bone is.
Right.
So when the space element of Vata aggravates, and we can talk about what aggravates that in a little bit, but when the space element of Vata aggravates, those pores increase in size, and then you get low bone density.
Yes, very good example of that.
There's also something that we haven't talked about yet, but with Vata, because of the nature of its movement through the system, and because it is cold by nature or cool by nature, it creates dryness and roughness in the system. That's another important factor when you're talking about the body. So if you imagine a desert landscape and you imagine a dry wind blowing over the ground, it wicks all the moisture from the ground and the ground becomes cracked and dry. That's what can happen in our body if we have too much vata.
Right. So it's dryness of the skin, dryness of the bowel movements, the eyes, the hair, the nails, the lips.
Exactly. The body can't hold moisture very well when there's too much vata. And so it starts drying out and cracking and becoming brittle. That's the important part. Because when something's brittle, it loses its resilience and then can be damaged by other factors.
Right, absolutely. Okay, great. And let's go back before we go too far forward to aggravated space. You said you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. So we're familiar with the tastes in Ayurveda. Have we talked about that? I'm not sure if we've talked about that in the past.
I've talked about it in other episodes, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Then the astringent taste is what can alter the balance of spaciousness in the channels. So astringency tends to contract channels, tighten things up. So we like to use it on skin products to make our skin look tighter and stuff like that. It has astringency, and that gives our tissues an elastic type quality. Too much astringency will contract the channels, and too little astringency in the body creates looseness or overexpansion of the tissues.
Right.
And then the spaces increase in some areas, and then they slough and decrease in other areas. But basically, they increase. And then more space means more room for movement. And that increased room for movement can aggravate the movement qualities of vata as well once the space increases.
Right.
Or if the space decreases too much, like in hypertension. So like, for example, let's say we drink too much caffeine, the blood vessels constrict, and so space decreases, but you have the same amount of fluid flowing through a smaller space, that increases pressure.
Right.
So it's one of the causes of high blood pressure. Constricted vascular channels.
Okay. And so we're talking about constriction on a physical level, and then I think it'd be interesting to chat about constriction on a subtle level and that increase of spaciousness and its effect on mental health.
Right. So this is the fun part with vata. Vata has a huge influence over the mind, which in Ayurveda is called manas. And I think here it would be good to just talk a little bit about the nature of manas and the mind in Ayurveda, because it's a little bit different than maybe what we think it is in Western terms.
Great, let's do that.
So it's actually a channel. The mind runs through a channel in the body, like blood flows through channels, stuff like that. But it's a subtle channel. It's not a channel that you would per se would call physical, even though at the end of the day it is. But the mind flows through this channel and can go anywhere in the body because it's subtle, and by nature that means that it could go places. It can't be stopped by obstructions. Subtleness transcends those barriers. So we have some conscious influence over this mind channel, and we can direct our mind to experience different parts of our system, or not necessarily our own body, but experiences in life outside of our body. But if we close our eyes and we direct our mind to, say, our heart, all of a sudden we become consciously aware of a heartbeat that was going on the whole time. We just weren't paying attention to it before. So that is the movement of the mind through the mind channel. And vata controls that movement. So someone with destabilized vata dosha has a hard time directing their mind. If that becomes too extreme, you get something like ADHD. Right? Yeah. So, but the other thing is that the mind is a singularity in Ayurveda. It's one thing. And so it's infinitely fast. So you can move it around super fast. So it seems like it's in a lot of different places at once.
Right.
But the reality of the mind is that it's actually only paying attention to one thing at one time.
Right. So that means we cannot multitask.
Not
do it well.
Not in the truest sense of the word,
right.
But the mind can be so fast that it just seems like we're doing many things all at once,
right.
But really we're just doing one thing after another in succession really, really, really fast.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so Vata moves the mind around, but also stabilizes or stops moving the mind, and also expands and contracts the mind's focus. And that's more the spacious element of Vata. So we can have psychological ailments based on Vata imbalances that deal with our ability to widen and lessen the scope of our mind at any given time and move it from object to object at any given time. And when you take that and you look at practices like meditation or pranayama, which I'm huge fans of, and we've talked about before, you're training the mind by balancing the Vata dosha.
Right.
And that's why it's so effective to do like pranayama in conjunction with meditation, because doing all that breath work pacifies Vata or balances Vata. And then once Vata is balanced, you're able to stabilize the mind and you can meditate.
Right.
So it all works together like that. And then when you can stabilize the mind and meditate, or you can expand and contract the mind at will, then you're able to access different realms of creativity. And that's why art can be so helpful as a therapeutic measure, because you're exercising that capacity in yourself by engaging the Vata dosha in a wholesome way.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that, in allowing Vata to be pacified via creative activities, whether it's gardening, cooking, and doing anything where you have a single pointed focus.
Absolutely. That's one of the best things you can do for Vata doshas.
Right.
And one of the big problems is that, you know, we have an increasing supply of young people who have extremely aggravated Vata dosha because of the use of electronics, which if you spend any amount of time watching TV or on a computer or whatever, you can see how it warps your mind into jumping from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic without really settling on anything.
Right.
The danger of that isn't as much the content as it is how you're training your mind to observe the world.
Right. It's a lot of sensory stimulation.
Yeah, over sensory stimulation, which is a great point to bring up, because in Ayurveda there are 3 causes of disease, basically. And one is misuse of the senses. The second is time. And the third is going against what you know to be true.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I kind of want to chat a little bit more about our current situation in this modern world of high tech, always on, always buzzing and vibrating, because there is an epidemic of anxiety and a lot of mental health issues going on right now. And Vata is largely responsible for this. And what are the other signs of an aggravated Vata in the mind? We talked about ADHD. What other areas does Vata show up when it's aggravated with mental health?
Fear.
Yeah.
Fear. So specifically fear of the future.
Right.
Creating scenarios in the mind, you know, where there's anxiety about what's to come when the reality is you really don't know what the outcome's going to be. So the creation of outcomes that are based in fear.
Right. Right, because Vata is generally future thinking. The natural tendency of Vata is to think ahead, right? To have a hard time in the present moment. And so then you add an aggravation into that. Then there's over-analyzing, overthinking, mind spinning that creates fear. And maybe would there panic attacks come into this as well?
Panic attacks is certainly an aggravated form of Vata once you've gone down the line a little bit. Shortness of breath. Anxiety is the big one, worry.
Yeah.
And, Vata wants to move faster than time.
Right.
So that's why it's always out ahead.
Right.
It's always on to the next thing. It's never stable.
Right.
And so it's jumping and jumping and jumping and jumping and jumping. And even when someone's thinking about the past, they're doing it in the context of what's to come.
Right, right. And I think also that with this increase in space and air qualities, that there is a increasing feeling of spaciousness, which when aggravated can lead to isolation and a feeling of loneliness and a feeling of being not connected and ungrounded.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point to bring up. Vata's the spaciousness can create loneliness and isolation even when around other people.
Yeah.
Those feelings, and that often leads to the use of substances.
Right. Right.
And Vatas have a strong drive to use substances to pacify that feeling.
Yeah. An example of this that I always think of on the extreme, if you think of, Vata doshas are very creative, right? Artists, actors, musicians. And if you think of a musician on tour, say they're doing their world tour, how many times do we hear of these musicians just falling apart because not only do they have irregularity in their schedule, they're having huge sensory overload when they're performing. So the senses are inundated. Long hours of traveling, messing up the circadian rhythms, out of routine. And that, I think, is an extreme form of Vata aggravation, but it's something that we typically see with creative people.
Yeah, so it's good to look at them to exactly as an extreme. And that's exactly the patterning that it follows. So like you said, travel is a huge one, right? The irregularity of your circadian rhythm, staying up late at night, and that's when you're doing most of your living hours, drugs, extreme sensory overload. What we want to take from those examples, because few of us are famous musicians touring the world,
right,
is that we're doing all of that on a lesser scale in our day-to-day lives if we have imbalanced Vata. Or if we're on the path of imbalancing our Vata, and we're going to develop, maybe we won't have extreme problems like they have, but we're going to develop a lesser version of the same problem.
Right, exactly. And talking about staying up late at night, insomnia can be a real issue, having trouble getting to sleep, the mind spinning, waking up between 2 and 6 a.m., right? That can really be an issue of aggravation for Vata as well.
Yeah, so the 2 to 6 a.m. thing is the natural time in nature when Vata increases. And that's not an imbalance. That's a natural function of nature.
Right.
But someone with a Vata imbalance is going to be hypersensitive to that. So they already have too much Vata in their system. And what does that mean in the case of sleep? Is that sleep in Ayurveda is defined as the mind withdrawing the senses from their objects. That's the definition of sleep in Ayurveda. So the mind is responsible for the experience of what the senses, the information that the senses carry. So, even when you're not listening to something, you're still receiving a lot of auditory input. Right. But once you bring your mind in line with your sense of hearing, then now all of a sudden you experience the sounds that have been coming in the whole time. So when the mind says, okay, we're going to sleep, and withdraws all input, so you're not seeing, you're not hearing, you're not feeling, you're not smelling, and you're not tasting, then you're asleep. Right. But the Vata dosha is responsible for that withdrawal. And so if Vata is aggravated and it doesn't obey the mind, and the mind doesn't obey you, then you have lost control over whether you can go to sleep or not. You can no longer withdraw all the senses from their objects.
Right. This is where a nighttime routine is so important for Vata to calm that nervous system down.
Exactly. And if you can't sleep, then you further aggravate Vata. Mm-hmm. And now you're in a downward spiral.
Right. So this is the perfect opportunity for me to tell you about my upcoming free Daily Habits Challenge. And it's all about sleep, perfectly in tune with what we're talking about here. So from February 3rd to February 9th, 2020, 7 days of a sleep challenge. The challenge is to be in bed by 10 p.m. every night. The reason 10 p.m. is important is because Ayurveda tells us that from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., Pitta energy rises, and this can give us the illusion of a second wind. So we ideally want to be in bed and sleeping before that Pitta energy energizes us. So if you would like to join this free challenge, please just click on the link in the show notes, and I will be hosting it on the private Facebook group, the Elements of Ayurveda podcast Facebook group. If you're not on Facebook, just join my Instagram or at least join my weekly newsletter. I'll be putting information in there also. So all those links will be in the show notes. So it'd be really lovely if you could join us, and let's implement some really good, healthy sleeping habits. I'll be giving lots of tips and guidelines over this 1 week challenge. And I have one more event to share with you. It's my upcoming Daily Habits for a Holistic Health course. We just talked about how it's so essential to have a good nighttime routine, to have these daily self-care practices. Well, that's what I cover in this 28-day online course. And I have a group discounted program that's starting February 21st, 2020. And in this course, we not only implement a routine of daily self-care habits to help keep your mind and body in balance. We talk about morning routine and an evening routine to calm the nervous system so you can sleep. But we also talk about the circadian rhythms and working with the energies of the day rather than going against them and suffering. We talk about the different mental qualities and really understanding your mental constitution and how to achieve balance and how to recognize when it's going out of balance. And we'll bring in meditation and breath practices and yoga that's tailored to your dosha. You'll also learn about the foundations of Ayurvedic healing so that you can become your own healer and catch those imbalances or aggravations when they're just starting at a really subtle level so that you don't experience dis-ease in the body or mind. And we'll also talk about the power of positivity and compassion, how that impacts your health and well-being, and also tuning in to your intuition to guide you in life. So if you're interested in this 28-day online course, like I said, I have a discounted group program where I'm going to support you for the 28 days starting February 21st. If you're listening to this podcast after that date, this course is also available privately. So just click on the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Okay, let's get back to the show. And we didn't actually talk about the seat of Vata in the body.
The seat of Vata in the body is the large intestine, the colon, basically.
Yeah.
And that's where Vata is at home and where it starts out to the rest of the body. There are some more subtle aspects of that, like the seat of prana is in the heart, and prana is an aspect of Vata.
Right.
So Vata has these like satellite bases all over the body. But basically its main abode is the large intestine, and that is Apana Vata. Apana is the opposite of prana, and prana is an inward moving force to the center. Apana is an eliminative force away from the center. So it's responsible for bowel movements, it's responsible for urination, it's responsible for ejaculation, it's responsible for those types of... Yeah, exactly.
Menstrual cycle, yeah.
Menstrual cycle, yes. Yeah. And it's responsible for eliminating everything, and then that's the way the body clears or corrects the flow of Vata by changing its pressure, is through elimination. So super important, obviously.
Right. And so this is why when Vata is aggravated, it can show up in a lot of elimination problems, dryness, constipation. There can also be a lot of bloating and excessive gas.
Right. So if Apana Vata is out of balance, which is often the first aspect of Vata to go out of balance, then, and let's say someone gets constipated, super common condition. By the way, constipation in Ayurveda is termed as not having a bowel movement. If you skip even one day, you're considered constipated. Whereas in Western medicine, often it's considered like a week.
Right.
But that would be absolute insanity in Ayurveda. Yeah. I mean, to not have a bowel movement for a week would be like, oh my God, you got a major problem. Like, you got to take care of this right away.
Right.
So if you don't have a bowel movement for one day, you're considered constipated in Ayurveda. And now you're going to have pressure build up in your large intestine that could back up into the small intestine. And then your nervous system gets aggravated and your circadian rhythm gets aggravated and your body starts acting in a stressed out state, which can produce anxiety. And so on and so forth. So constipation can cause a mental disorder.
Right.
It goes all the way up into the head.
Yeah, physical pain affecting the mind and mental pain affecting the body.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're one and the same thing. We like to call them two different things, but they're not.
Right. Right, it's all connected. And so another thing we didn't discuss with Vata when it's aggravated is excess movement. We talked about excess movement in the mind, but in the body then it could be tremors or tingling or twitching.
Twitching is like the most minor symptom. There's a little localized Vata imbalance.
Right.
Tremor is obviously a much more serious symptom. What it's showing you is that there's a channel through your nervous system where Vata's gone out of balance and can no longer be inhibited. Right. And so now you have an unwillful shake or tremor. And the way to pacify that is most often a Vata pacifying protocol in Ayurveda so that your nervous system isn't overloaded by all these inputs that can't stop. Too much input expressed through the nervous system is probably the cause of most of our Vata challenges, I would say, these days. And a tremor is a very physical manifestation of that excessive input.
Right. Thanks for that, Victor. We covered earlier about the strengths of Vata. Let's talk a little bit about the Vata weaknesses. We talked about Pitta's perfectionism and, Kapha's tendency to be a little lazy when it's aggravated. So in what ways does Vata have to watch out for these aggravations that can manifest?
Vatas can actually go a lot of different directions by their nature, right? But they tend to be on all the time and always moving. So I don't know what's the term for that. Not like perfectionist, like a Pitta, a manic, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
But then followed by a complete and utter crash.
Right, totally hit the wall.
Yeah, totally hit the wall and just almost catatonic.
Right. I've had that experience one time, a really extreme experience with a friend one time. Totally, hyper and chatting away. We're in a restaurant and within a second, she's like, I have to lie down, and lay down on the couch in the restaurant because she just, her Vata just hit the wall. And it was such an extreme experience of that. I was like, wow, one moment you're just go, and the next minute you're flat out, like can't talk, can't eat, just need to restore. Yeah,
that is very classic Vata. Yeah, exactly. And so, and they so abhor rhythm. I mean, it's like it feels like they may as well, if they have to fit into a rhythm, it's like you're killing them.
Right, right.
It's like, no, tonight I feel so wonderful. I want to stay up. I want to create. I want to do my passion. I want to make art. I want to make music, whatever, dance all night, whatever. And it's like the spirit has come down and taken them.
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day it's like, just leave me in a dark room alone. I have to recover.
Right. You have to just rejuvenate from that.
Right. And if you say, why don't you maybe not stay up all night and just set aside 2 hours for your artwork and maybe sleep the rest of the time and just create a rhythm so that you got that every day, and then you don't like have these crazy highs and lows, and they'll look at you like you just, took their puppy away from them. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like, what? That's not life. That sounds like the ultimate cage, prison. I can't just express myself whenever I want to express myself as I want to express myself.
Right.
That's right. But of course, that's an imbalance.
Right. Yes. Big time imbalance. And I find too that when Vata is aggravated, it's just trying to organize themselves, even with timings of things. It's just very, very hard.
It is. I can't think of a harder thing, honestly. To tell you the truth, when a Vata comes in, when someone with a Vata imbalance and Vata constitution comes into the clinic, and I'm trying to set up a health routine for them, that's one of the most challenging conversations to have, because they don't want to.
Right.
Just like Pittas don't want to give up drinking coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's not the hardest. That's probably the hardest, getting a Pitta to give up coffee. But second hardest is a Vata and creating routine for them. But it's absolutely necessary. And if they can create that for themselves and get into it by some miracle or another, they actually really, really benefit and are much happier for it.
Right.
But it's an uphill battle all the way. It's a huge work to do, and it's super rewarding.
Absolutely. And I do think that support is necessary here, because what happens, if I feel with Vata, when aggravated, taking on so much, I want to do this and this and this, and I'm going to do it all, and I'm going to do it all now, whereas that's not sustainable, and it's overwhelming. And something that comes up for Vata when aggravated is overwhelm, because there's just too much coming in and there's just too much going on. So I think as support during that process of trying to bring in a daily routine that's in tune with the circadian rhythms, that includes sleep and exercise and regular meals and so on, I think that's really necessary, because that tendency to take on too much and try to change too much at once.
Yeah, and part of, if you can get someone with a Vata constitution to agree or to take it in that the real creative act that they can do is creating a really fluid and well-balanced lifestyle. And that's an act of creativity in and of itself.
Right.
That can help, but the hard part is it doesn't feel good to them at first.
Yes, at first, until they start feeling the benefits of it.
Right. And that's when you need a nice, good Pitta to cook them lunch.
Yeah.
And you need a nice, good Kapha to give them a hug.
Right.
And those forces in their life can encourage them to back down from the Vata ledge. Not where they're going to jump off to, their peril, but that's where they launch their hang glider from.
Right.
It's like, don't go hang gliding while there's a tornado out there. Just wait until there's a sunny day.
Right.
That's your Kapha, right?
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you just come inside and we'll relax while there's a huge rainstorm outside.
Yeah.
But the Vata's like, no, I need to fly and I need to do it now. And that's not always the best thing.
Right, because I feel as well, I think this lack of desire for routine and this need for spontaneity, I feel sometimes it's that fear, right, of that their creative juices will be stagnant. But actually, it's going to be the opposite. If they have a routine with good sleep and good self-care practices and so on, that their creativity will flow better. and they're very intuitive, and that will flow better. There'll be better communication there if they are in balance.
Yeah, and they'll feel good in their body. I think that's the main thing, is that the Vata dosha is responsible for 80% of diseases. And that, I'm not saying that someone with a Vata constitution is going to get 80% of the diseases, but what I'm saying is that there's just a reality, or I guess you could call it a trade-off, although that's probably not the best way to say it, but you get this massive inspiration and intuitive creativity that comes with the package. But you get a little bit more of a physical susceptibility to the world and your own internal machinations, as opposed to a Pitta or a Kapha, who have a natural resilience that Vatas do not possess by nature. And that has to be, I mean, that's just a reality of the makeup. So that has to be worked with. And that's the big challenge, just like each dosha has its own big challenge.
Right.
But that's the one for Vata, is how do I balance this massive creativity with the fact that my body can't keep up with that all the time, and that I have to, quote unquote, slow down to accommodate the needs of my system.
Right. Right.
If they could get over that illusion that by doing more really fast means that life is better, then they can really they can merge that polarity or that duality, and they can be whole and access good health and a high level of creativity in a balanced way, and then bring themselves forward fully and healthfully.
Right. And it is merging, like you said, the grounding and also having that creativity. And it is that merging together that will sustain them. Yeah,
definitely, because no one's asking a Vata to give up creativity. That's the last thing we want to happen. We need that. Yeah. Right. But we are asking them to do it in a way that doesn't hurt themselves.
Right.
And that's
spiral.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, is there's almost a sense of disregard for the self, or I should say the physical self, that Vatas carry, because they're so out there.
Yeah.
It's not taking the whole picture into account.
We talked about routine being one of the most important things for Vata, but what other diet and lifestyle tips could we bring in to pacify Vata?
In general, Vata, so we've talked about Agni before, the digestive fire. In Vata constitutions, that Agni is, take a guess, it's erratic, right?
Right.
So they'll go from not being hungry to being a little bit hungry to not being hungry to being super hungry to being not hungry to a little bit, I don't even know anymore. That's a Vata digestive tract. And what the rhythm and routine does is it helps even that out. I'm not saying it's going to ever be perfect. But it helps it so that, for the most part, it's like, I'm a medium level of hungry and I can eat appropriately. So that's that. But the other big thing is, so if you look at the qualities of Vata, and the imbalancing qualities of Vata are excessive coldness, excessive roughness, excessive dryness, excessive spaciousness, you want to avoid foods with those qualities in general.
Right. So dry is pretty, it's pretty simple to figure out. So too or cold, but spaciousness would be anything that's light and airy, like popcorn. Rice cakes, popcorn. I know.
Yeah,
and it's funny.
Exactly.
Most Vatas love popcorn.
Yeah, well, we all love the thing that aggravates our constitution, dosha, right? So, yeah, exactly. So for the most part, stay away from dry, rough things like chips, crackers, rice cakes, or puffed rice or whatever, things like that have a lot of spaciousness and dryness. The reason, what does it mean when something's dry and you eat it? It means it requires moisture from your system to digest.
Right.
So when you eat a dry cracker, your body has to dump water into the digestive tract to process that food properly. But Vatas already run dry. They don't have a lot of extra moisture to spare. And the more moisture they lose, the more brittle their tissues get. And the more brittle the tissues get, the less resilient the tissues are, and the easier they break down. causing problems.
Right.
So instead, you want to eat more moist, warm, but not super heavy. If you eat super heavy, then the Agni can't take it,
Right.
can't process it.
Right.
So there's like, for example, there's a type of rice called red rice that you could buy in most type of Indian grocery stores, and you could buy it online for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Red rice has the qualities of, it holds a lot of water, so it stays very moist, but at the same time, it's light to digest. That's the ideal type of food for Vata.
Right.
The Agni can process it fully, and it adds moisture to the system.
Great.
So things like sweet potatoes, zucchini, pumpkin, those kinds of foods are really good because they have the same type of qualities, whereas greens are less ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Greens can be a little bit harder to digest and do not contain the same level of moisture as some other foods.
Right. So moisture, and then root vegetables, they have that earthy grounding quality.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Raw food is, not with the exception of fruit, raw food, raw greens, salads, things like that, are cold and rough and very hard to digest.
Right.
But Vatas just want to eat them up all day and night.
Yeah, yeah. And let's talk about cruciferous vegetables.
Yes. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, they produce a lot of gas, which is obviously dominated by the air element, and require a very healthy Agni to digest fully. So not the ideal food for Vatas.
Right, right. They create a lot of excessive bloating and excessive gas, like you said. And I'd like to touch on here, Victor, a little bit about how to eat, because I think that's really important for Vata. You know, a Vata person may like to be multitasking while they're eating. So this can really affect the digestion, right?
Oh, yeah. So remember, it's all about that mind, right? And we talked about the mind being able to move very quickly, but at the end of the day, it's in one place at one time. So when you're eating, if you're also watching something, if you're typing, if you're whatever-ing, what you're not doing is paying attention to how you're eating. And your nervous system's extremely active. And so you're putting in more than the food. You're putting in the food plus whatever you're doing, and you're stimulating all your senses. And so you're getting that overstimulation feeling, which is almost like a drug. And Vata's like that.
Yes.
But what you're doing is you're dispersing your digestive power throughout your system. And that's not good. That's going to weaken your digestion and cause problems down the line. So very important for Vatas, especially everyone, but especially Vatas, to sit down, breathe, relax, calm their muscular system down, calm their nervous system down, relax, take some time, and engage in the experience of eating, which doesn't just mean putting food in your mouth. It means looking at your food. It means smelling your food, salivating, slowly chewing, swallowing, tasting. And it's actually really great for Vatas to eat with their hands.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So not customary in Western culture, but in most Eastern cultures, they eat with their hands.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And for Vata, what that does is, remember how Vata rules the sense of touch. So it engages that sense in union with the food. And when they touch the food, the qualities of that food are going to be warm and moist. And the sense of touch picks up on that.
That's a great point.
And so the moment they grab their food and they feel that feeling, it's going to start pacifying Vata in their nervous system.
I love that idea.
Yeah, and now when they put it in their mouth and they're, engaged in the whole process, it's just a whole different experience than throwing food in your mouth while watching TV and talking to your best friend.
Right, right. And I feel like when you're eating with your hands, you have to be more mindful. Yeah, and I always recommend as well, like having a gratefulness practice before you eat, just to calm the nervous system, to prepare your body. I'm going to intake food and be really mindful of chewing slowly. You don't want to take in a lot of excess air and so on.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd like to get your thought, Ayurveda promotes a plant-based diet, right? And vegetarian. What's your thoughts on meat for Vata?
Don't do it.
Because there are some, no, I hear you. I promote a plant-based lifestyle, but I know that, for example, when I worked at the Ayurvedic Center, sometimes for Vata, it is recommended, perhaps if they're very aggravated, to have some meat for grounding or bone broth or something like that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that is a really important point. Ayurveda is not strictly a vegetarian science.
Right.
It does condone the use of certain meat in certain circumstances, and that is medicinally.
Right.
So if you have a case of severe emaciation, which is a Vata aggravation, right? Things like that, then you use meat to help pacify Vata, but usually it's in the form of a broth.
Yes.
Or a lot of times it's goat meat for
Exactly.
a bunch of reasons we don't need to get into
Yeah.
here. But basically there are specific uses for it, but not as a day-to-day dietary habit.
Right. Right.
So I think that, and the reason why is meat's very hard to digest. It's very heavy, and the Agni of Vata is not suited to digest very heavy things.
Right. With the irregularity of the digestive system, it can be very hard to break down that tough protein.
Yeah, and so what Vatas experience a lot is they get very hungry, and they'll eat a lot while they're hungry, but then immediately after their Agni will shut down. And they won't know it because they just think they're full.
Yeah.
But what really happened is their Agni shut down, and they're not going to digest what they just ate. And it's going to cause them big time digestive upset.
Right. Great. Well, thanks for covering that. I think that's an important question that comes up again and again. Now, let's talk about something which is amazing for Vata, is good fats, ghee, avocado.
Yeah, oil in general is good for Vata as long as it's taken in moderation, because once again, it carries the opposite qualities of Vata. So ghee is perfect. It is cooling, but it's not cold. But what it does is it stimulates Agni, and Agni by nature is hot. So when you have ghee in the right proportion, then it will increase the warmth of your body. So that's opposite to Vata. It's oily and unctuous, which is opposite to dry. But it also maintains the subtlety, which in this case is good because it could spread through all the channels easily.
Right. Lubricating the body, that dryness and that constriction.
Right. Right. So ghee can be and it's easier to digest than butter, let's say, because the milk solids have been removed from it.
Right.
So it's lighter. So it's got that same thing as that red rice has going for it. It's got an unctuousness to it and a moistness to it, but it's also light. Yeah.
Great. So incorporating good fats in every meal is really good. Yeah.
Every meal. And, to speak to some of the other oils, olive oil is okay. I wouldn't say don't use it, but it has a little bit of an astringent quality. Sesame oil is very good for Vata, but it's on the heavier side. So it's very good for a Vata who's not dealing with a lot of digestive issues.
Right.
Those are, some of the main cooking oils.
Right.
Grapeseed oil, similar to olive oil.
Okay, great tips there. Thank you. And so I'd love to finish up with some of the most important ways to balance Vata with mindfulness techniques. And you alluded to meditation and pranayama earlier. And I think this is some of the simplest ways to balance Vata. And I think definitely should be in all of our daily routines, because we all have a tendency towards Vata aggravation in the modern world. So can you talk a little bit about the mindfulness practices that you would recommend for Vata?
For Vata, pranayama is par excellence.
Voila.
Yeah, it is dealing directly with Vata. It's utilizing Vata in a wholesome way, and I don't want to skip over that. really the art of staying balanced is to use each of the doshas in a wholesome way. You don't want to not use them, or their qualities, I should say.
Yes.
So you can take the qualities and use them. They're neutral in and of themselves. Mm-hmm. And if you use them unwholesomely, you're going to get sick. And if you use them wholesomely, you will increase your health. Mm. So pranayama breath practice is a wholesome way to use the qualities of vata to balance your vata dosha. Because everything's going in the right direction at the right time in the right proportion.
Right.
So it's a form of training for your system you're basically saying, hey, this is how you use vata properly to your body.
Right.
And then if you practice and practice and repeat, your body says, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't mean do tons of pranayama every day all the time. That would be excessive.
Right. And can I just interject here and be careful about the type of pranayama you do, right? Alternate nostril breathing is great, but maybe the buzzing breath or vibrational breath may be too aggravating.
Right. And that's where it's hard to give a general catch-all example here. But everyone's pretty safe with doing long, slow, deep breathing into the abdomen.
Right. Like a yogic breath. Yeah.
Like a yogic breath. But, find someone locally who can help you and who knows about this stuff and who can tell you it's like, hey, this is a really great breathing exercise. This is how long to do it for. Mm-hmm. And these things should not be underestimated. They're very powerful. They've been around for thousands and thousands of years. And they have big impact on the system.
Huge, yeah.
Huge. And they can correct a lot of imbalances, especially when practiced properly.
Yeah. They can correct a lot of imbalances, absolutely. And they can also wreak havoc if practiced incorrectly. And I've witnessed a lot of that in the past. Yeah. It can really affect the mind and the body if practiced incorrectly.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I would say for Vatas have a hard time sitting down and meditating. We use that word very lightly these days, meditation. There are many stages to meditation. It's a whole art form and practice. It's not that you just sit down, close your eyes, and now you're meditating. But Vatas can have a hard time because they have a hard time getting to the stage of meditation that demands single-pointed focus.
Right.
But what can help with that a lot is the repetition of mantra. Getting absorbed in that sound current and having something to focus on.
Exactly, yeah.
Specifically a sound, because remember, hearing is the other sense that's associated with Vata or commanded by Vata. So engaging the ears with a mantra and engaging the voice, which calms down the vagus nerve, which we've talked about in the past. And the repetition can create a type of single-pointed focusness for the mind that really helps stabilize the mind, which is crucial for Vatas.
Right, right.
Takes them out of the future, takes them out of the past, and holds them squarely in the present.
Exactly.
And it's like drinking a glass of water after you've been parched for 3 days. That's what it feels like to a Vata.
Yeah.
So I'd say the combination of those two practices are where most people should start. And then when they get more advanced, then they can use meditation.
Yes, absolutely. Great advice. And starting with just a few minutes. No need to torture yourself with trying to sit there for a long time. Start with a few minutes, build up your confidence, empower yourself, and start first thing in the morning, I would say as well.
Yep, between the hours of 4 and 7 a.m.
Right, right. So you're using that lovely subtle energy in the morning, great time when nature is silent to kind of sit and be peaceful, and you're less likely to be distracted first thing in the morning. So great tips there, Victor. Thank you so much. Really felt that we dug in deep there to vibrating Vata. So thanks a million for that. And Victor, I'd love for you to tell us what you have coming up at the center and where people can find out more about you and what you offer.
So what we always have some events going on in Northern California, but our big event that's coming up is a 5-day retreat, yoga and Ayurveda retreat in Briere, Spain, which is about an hour and a half north of Barcelona. It's a coastal town, very beautiful. And so we're going to delve deeply into some topics and, of course, practice yoga and mantra and meditation and pranayama there in a beautiful context.
Great. And when is that?
That's May 3rd to May 8th.
Great.
And we run clinic here full time in Gualala, Northern California. So we always have clinical activities going on, and we're always helping people get healthy. So if any of the listeners want to give us a call, we love talking in person.
Great.
Or I guess over the phone, not in person, but always preferably in person.
Yeah.
We're always teaching yoga classes here as well. So very busy.
Wonderful.
But not so busy that we aggravate our vata.
There you go. You know how to keep it in balance. Well, I will put all those links in the show notes so that you can get over there and check out all that Victor has to offer. And Victor, thank you so much for coming on today and for doing this trilogy with me. It was great fun, and we learned so much, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much. That's the first trilogy I've completed on the dosha.
Well, we'd love to have you back again. So we won't say goodbye. We'll say see you later.
Yeah, we'll say arrivederci.
Voila. Okay, great, Victor. Thanks a million. Take good care of yourself, and we'll chat again soon.
Thanks, Colette. Talk to you later.
Take care. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ayurvedic Dr. Victor Briere. Please check out the show notes for all the links. And if you feel that this episode would be beneficial to a family member or friends, please share the episode with them. I think that we could all benefit from these Vata tips because everybody is a little Vata aggravated these days, given our modern world and the always on mode that we're in. So I think it could be beneficial for lots of us. And I'm also going to put a link to my upcoming free sleep challenge starting February 3rd. Also the Daily Habits course, the group discounted course that's starting February 21st, along with a link to my Patreon page where you can support the podcast and the social media links. And as I said, I'll be putting Dr. Victor's links in the show notes as well, so please check it out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and ciao for now.